Well, thank you very much, Justin, for that those kind words of introduction, and thank you all for coming to this kind of second talk in our Leeds DigiFest series. Now, I can only assume there's one of two reasons why you've all arrived. One, it could be because you've heard about the quality of the catering and the availability of alcohol, or two, it's because you're as passionate about the subject matter or the idea behind the subject matter as perhaps. I suppose in the title there's three kind of key themes. I'm sort of going to cover these themes one by one in this presentation. So the first is business analysis, something that I'm very passionate about. I too, as well as Austin, have been a business analyst for a long time. Spent most of my career as a business analyst. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about my experience of it, my interpretation of it from that particular set of experiences and the lessons that I've drawn from it. I'm then going to talk about BAD. Now, BAD, I don't know how aware you guys are of BAD. BAD is sort of expressed in detail on the wall over here. It's on bad.tools.com. There's a lot of content in there. So I'm going to talk about how I discovered it, my initial attempts to use elements of it and how that went and what I learned from it. And then the kind of penny drop moments that sort of cemented my understanding of it and then opened up other opportunities for the business analysis function in the company I was working for at the time, which was Hermes, now Every. And then I'm going to talk about what happened when the big opportunity came, how the fact that I've been involved in the BAD Toolkit sort of primed me to be able to capitalise on that opportunity, how it enabled the business to pivot quickly in a unique set of circumstances, and fundamentally how it influenced how Hermes thought about change. So, business analysis. So this is me. I'm actually a public relations graduate, and like most public relations graduate, when I graduated, I went to work in a call centre. But I went to work in a call centre for a company that was growing very, very rapidly. So within a couple of months, I was a project coordinator within customer care. 18 months after that, I became a business analyst around about the turn of the millennium. As the organisation evolved, my business analysis role evolved. So I became a solution designer when it became the technology services organisation. I became a business implementation analyst when it became the design practice. But really what characterised all of those roles was kind of delivery and change management. I then left O2 and joined Leeds City Council, which was a very, very interesting experience, very different kind of business context and background. And I joined as a senior business process analyst in the IT department. Another reorg shifted us more centrally into corporate services. And then finally, when I became a BA manager at Leeds City Council, we were actually shifted into an internal audit department. So business analysis can appear in many different areas of an organisation. Internal audit is probably the least obvious, I think, in my career. I then left Leeds City Council and went to join Asda as a senior business analyst, and became a business analysis manager, specifically in the logistics tower. And that's what led to the opportunity to join Hermes. Now, what was really interesting about working for Leeds City Council is that most of the business analysis that we were doing was pre-project. So it was problem diagnosis. We used to get funded based on internal recharge going into services, and then projects might happen off the back of it. So it was a very kind of different shape to the role at O2. And when I joined Hermes, I saw the opportunity to kind of recapture a little bit of what I enjoyed about that, because it was a younger, growing company, a little bit more rudimentary in terms of how it was operating in comparison with a global retailer. And so I joined as a lead business analyst and inherited a team, and that team sat in a change management group that was actually in the finance department. That moved to the IT department before long, and then a project delivery department was created out of IT when I became a principal business analyst, and then finally when I left, I was a principal business analyst in product and delivery. And the reason why I'm kind of going through all of this is really just to kind of make the point that as a business analyst in 4 organisations, I had 14 different job titles, which talks to some extent to the variety of the role in different organisations. But it was at Hermes that I discovered the BAD Toolkit. So I'm going to talk a little bit in a moment about how that happened and what impact that had. And now I'm a principal consultant at Brendo. It's the first job title I've had in 23 years that doesn't have business or analyst somewhere in the job title. But throughout all of those different positions and different experiences, I guess if I was to distill my experience and what I've learned from it into 3 key points, it would be these. So the first is that business analysis is kind of just a catch-all term for anything that is involved in helping the business move from state A to state B. The biggest component of that is always people. Most people think in pictures, so if you can help people picture something, then you can help them understand it. And to that end, the big picture is absolutely everything, because without context, change makes people nervous. With context, you get alignment. You get an alignment that multiplies traction and really drives progress. So for me, that's really important. Can anybody guess what that picture is there? Anybody want to hazard a guess at what that might be? Well, for context, it's household dust magnified 1,000 times. So it does help, doesn't it, knowing the context to be able to understand what you're actually looking at. Really, really important point that I've drawn from my experience. But the trouble with business analysis is that business analysts are often a victim of their own success. So because there's a really wide potential scope of what business analysis is in an organisation, because responsibilities might vary an awful lot between organisations, and because the business analyst or effective business analysts need to be flexible enough to do anything that's required to help the business get from state A to state B, it's really hard to define. And if it's hard to define, it makes it hard to promote in an organisation. And that's something that's exacerbated by the fact that a business analyst often works under a figurehead. So it might be a project or a program manager, it might be a product owner, but you've got a figurehead associated with the change, and then you've got a business analyst who's kind of working in the background. I like to think of it as like a concierge for that figurehead. Consigliere for that. Maybe concierge. I don't know, it depends on your skill set. But I think because of all of those circumstances, there's a perception that what business analysis is about the application of kind of methods and tools and techniques and deliverables. And as such, it tends to be described in skills matrices and qualifications and what have you. But they're all really about how it's done and not what it is. I mean, as a business analyst, I need business analysts in the room. How do you describe what you do to your elderly or indeed younger relatives? I mean, I try frequently. At best, I get sort of blank expressions. At worst, I get sort of quizzical looks. What? You lost me at project, son. That's a direct quote from my dad. So you can see how much success that I've had being able to do that in a domestic context. But organisations definitely value good BAs, even if they're not entirely sure why. And there's a couple of sort of analogies that I think encapsulate this. So I heard a quote about a year ago, which I thought, I'll have that. I'll remember that. And it was from a director in an organisation that said BAs are like roast potatoes. They're not necessarily the main event, but you wouldn't want a Sunday dinner without them. And I thought, yeah, that resonates with me. I like that. You know, good roasties can make a roast dinner. Bad roasties can ruin it, but they're not the main event, are they? And the second one is this gentleman on the right-hand side of the screen. Does anybody know who this gentleman on the right-hand side of the screen is? I've given you a bit of a clue by writing his name under his quote, but that's but that's Paolo Maldini. Now, he was an Italian defender. He's generally considered the greatest defender ever to play the game. And I love this quote from him. He says, if I have to make a tackle, I've already made a mistake. If I have to make a tackle, I've already made a mistake. And that's really interesting, because you think about football and you think about all of the statistics that come out of football and Premier League and Fantasy League and points and Optastats and all the rest of it. And you would have thought that, you know, an effective defender is scoring highly in terms of the number of tackles or goal line clearances or headers. But what he's saying is, if I have to make a tackle, I've already made a mistake. And there's one particular example of where he won man of the match in a game where he didn't touch the ball, or he hardly touched the ball. And he did that through positioning, being able to read the game, the big picture of the game, knowing where to go on the pitch in order to influence the play and ultimately allow his team to win. And for me, that's a really, really good analogy of what makes a good business analyst. But it is becoming an increasingly crowded space. Now, back in the good old days, you had the business that knew nothing about technology. You had the IT teams that knew nothing about the business. You had the business analyst in the middle acting as the interpreter and translator both ways on that spectrum. Now, it's different. The BA space, the bits where the two parts on the Venn diagram overlap, has become a lot more fractured. And in Hermes, we had UX designers, we had product managers, product owners, we had even the business analysis space was fractured. We had enterprise BAs looking at the big picture in the business side. We had tech solution BAs working with the product teams. We even had people in the business that were doing what I would consider to be business analysis. So there were operational improvement analysts, there were MI analysts, etc., etc. So if that's the difference between now and then, it does beg the question, what is the future for the business analyst? And my thoughts on that are that the clue could very well be in the term. Because what's created this fracturing is Agile. Agile has pretty comprehensively won the methodology wars. It's definitely the reason why the business analysis space or the requirements into IT space is becoming more fractured. But organisations still struggle to apply it fully. And the chances are that, you know, the examples of Agile, the implementations that you're seeing in your organisations are flawed in some way. So the question I kind of want to address is, how does a business analyst, in light of this kind of fracturing of the profession, get on the front foot in an increasingly agile world? And it's helpful to think. I've been in business analysis for 23 years, and I've often thought, well, what is the real pinnacle of the profession? And it's probably different for different people. I guess it's horses for courses, but for me, it's about hacking an organisation's thought process. Being the trusted advisor, that's a term that's used quite sort of liberally in this space, but actually genuinely being a trusted advisor at ever higher levels of the organisation. And I suppose, if I picture it in my mind's eye, it's when the CEO comes up to you, taps you on the shoulder and says, Tim, have you got 10 minutes? I've got this big idea that I'd like to run by you because I really like the way you think. So with that in mind, this is how I got acquainted with the Blended Agile Delivery Toolkit. So I joined Hermes in 2015, and this was a company that was growing rapidly. It had double-digit growth in the previous 7 years. It was only really at this point starting to discover a concept of its own customers, because it had released My Hermes, which was a C2C product for the first time. And like many companies, it was struggling on aging IT infrastructure. I'm really struggling even more so to make the case for changing it when it's competing with new products that were going to make lots of money, or operational infrastructure that was going to save lots of money. And when I joined, I inherited a team of 6 BAs and got to grips with the change management framework that they were using, which had 115 different potential document templates in it. And I thought, there's a real contrast here, isn't there, between this kind of youthful, growing company that is maturing and 115 potential different documents that the team might be producing. And as a result of this, I had 6 BAs working across 4, albeit huge projects, but, you know, a real fear of senior stakeholders. And when I spoke to those senior stakeholders, they'd be saying things like, well, I spend 3 hours in a workshop with one of your BAs, and they come back 6 weeks later with a flowchart, which is about as much use to me as a chocolate fire does. It's a company that was very easy to request business changes and very little rigor required for business cases. So as a result of that, we tended to have 300-400 new ideas a year being submitted to the portfolio. So there were a couple of things that I started to do to try to address that. But the real big change happened after a couple of key events. So the first one is that the core system that took all of the parcel data about where the parcel had come from, where it was going, and where it was in the network, fundamental system. It fell over right in our peak period. And that created a lot of collateral damage. It took about 3 weeks to fix. People had to swarm over it, and the result of that is that our larger retail clients started to negotiate more heavily around the prices they paid us per parcel. So it had a big commercial impact. It also coincided with the IT director being replaced with a CIO. And this was a guy who had a real passion for products. He was a tech enthusiast, but he was also a salesman. So he was able to kind of combine those two events to secure a multi-million-pound investment in IT. And that was interesting because that's when things began to change. And suddenly we started to see consultants springing up all over the place to help us through the thought process of how we were going to spend this money effectively. Now, Austin, the gentleman who introduced me before I started whittling on, was consulting with one of those squads in IT. And it was one of the analysts on my team who came rushing upstairs and just says, Tim, you've got to go downstairs and meet this guy. He does exactly what you do. Scribbles things in his book as he's talking. So I did. I went downstairs. I met him. We scribbled lots of things in our books and had some really, really good conversations. But that was short-lived. But little did I know at the time that what we were talking about was the genesis of what you see on the wall over there and what you see on the BAD Tools website. This was the birth of the BAD Toolkit. And the things that we talked about were things like the cone of uncertainty and VMOST, which are right at the kind of front door of the toolkit, because these were the things that I was struggling with at the time. We had 300 or 400 project requests a year from the business. I had a team of 6 that were doing 4 projects over the course of a year. Really, really needed a filtration mechanism. And this was really powerful for 2 reasons. Firstly, because it tells you that when you don't know very much about an idea, any estimates that you're going to give about its value or its size are going to be reasonably plus or minus 400% out. And that really helps because people are nervous about giving estimates early on in projects, because if you put a number on something, you're then held to that number. And the cone of uncertainty and how that reduces through the different stages in the life cycle was a really powerful tool for dealing with those stakeholders in Hermes. And the second one was VMOST, which I don't know, there was something about VMOST that really kind of appealed to me as an individual. You know, I'm the sort of person who will be sat watching Netflix, eating crisps, fantasizing about running a marathon in sub 4 hours and thinking there's a difference here, isn't there, between where I'm trying to get to and the things that I'm trying to do. And perhaps something there that needs to be addressed. Well, VMOST for me is that. It's just a really accessible tool for reconciling where you're trying to get to with what you're doing to get there. And if what you're doing to get there isn't fitting, either you're trying to get to the wrong place or you're not going to get there. So these were where I had my kind of initial experiences with the toolkit. But the other thing that I noticed when I went on the website is that end to end, this describes a really kind of coherent narrative of how an idealized agile setup should work. And this was an understanding that I wasn't getting in the organizations that I was working in. You know, everything that I was seeing seemed to be flawed in some way. They were doing parts of it, but not all of it. It's the first time that I'd ever really seen it laid out so coherently from end to end. And I think that really appealed to my analyst sense of understanding how things work in a big picture framework. So when Austin offered me the opportunity to get involved in the community, I jumped at it and I never looked back. So what's in the toolkit? Now, I'm not going to go through the detail of it because that would take about 2.5 hours that we don't have, but just kind of in summary, it's fundamentally a collection of tools and techniques, and it's drawn from any and all agile methodologies on the basis of what the founders have used, that have been worked, that have worked. So it's on the basis of efficacy that these tools and techniques have sort of been gathered together. And collectively, it describes this narrative, this end-to-end process that gives you a sense of how Agile should work that I wasn't getting from the companies. But individually, they're a potent set of tools and approaches, and it's open sourced. It's free to use, and it's owned and driven by the community around it, so that it evolves and it grows. And all of that was really good. But you know, essentially, what you've got here are the different layers of organisational thinking. So, where's the organisation trying to get to? Why? What are the forces that are influencing that? Your kind of highest level initiative kind of prioritisation, which is where tools like VMOST come into it. How you can validate that you're doing the right thing and quickly gain confidence in an idea before you invest too much in it. How you set up for success. And then the bit really that most organisations start with is actually at a squad level. How do you make sure that that is as slick as possible? Because that's the only level of any of this at which any value is actually realised. So you've kind of got it broken down into these stages: strategic, alignment, and VMOST. What I like about that is the fact that it talks about even where the ideas are generated from. It's either changes in the organisation that are generating changes that need to be done by a company in any given time. It's insight, so it's either internal insight, MI within the company that's telling you that something needs to change, or market insight that's telling you that there's an opportunity that needs to be addressed. Or it could be it could be feedback that you're getting directly from customers. And essentially, these are the three key areas of change for a product or for an organisation. And then you've got your VMOST canvas, essentially, to filter that down to what if you think about where you're trying to get to, which of these ideas are best aligned to helping you get there. And it's a really, really powerful tool as such. Off the back of that is the discovery process. How do you get, and it's a problem a lot of organisations have, how do you get a quick view without investing too much time? How do you get enough confidence in the next idea being the one to pursue? So what would you do? And some tools in there like impact mapping, a concept prototype, high level idea of your costs and your benefits, and crucially getting feedback at an early stage to inform the idea. The Inception Toolkit, so that's really about, once you're confident that this is the right thing to do next, how do you make sure that the team is set up for success? What are the questions that they need to answer? Because if you don't answer those questions before you begin, the fact that people will have those questions in flight will slow you down. So really, this is kind of at the heart of Agile. And then elaboration and construction. So as I said previously, this is where most organisations start. So we're talking about things like sprints and processes like Three Amigos and user stories. But this is the real cold face of change, and understanding how that should work is particularly kind of helpful. But also, once you're starting to deliver value, how do you know that you're delivering value? What data and insight do you need? How are you set up to measure the benefits that your idea is purported to have? How do you support it? Because obviously introducing a new idea into an organisation requires coordination with support. But crucially, how do you monitor your achievement of the ROI that you thought you were going to get from the idea? And at what point do you evolve the idea because you've validated that it's working, or pivot on to something else? Now, folding around all of that, how do you ensure that the right roles and responsibilities are in place to be able to kind of start this in your organisation? And then when it works, scale it quickly. There's an awful lot of, I'm not going to attempt to talk through this slide, you'll be pleased to hear, but there's an awful lot of material in the BAD Toolkit that helps to describe that. So has anybody, I'm not going to play it because I'm an analyst, I'm a bit nervous of all the moving parts, but has anybody seen this video of the first follower principle? One person, two people, three people at the back. Well, essentially it's a crazy guy dancing in a field at a festival. And he's dancing on his own, and everybody's looking at the crazy guy dancing in the field. And then before long, somebody else thinks, I'll have a piece of that, and joins him dancing in the field. And this is the first follower. And the first follower has made it okay to go and do crazy dancing in the field. So before long, the third, the fourth, the fifth, and over the space of 2 or 3 minutes, you've got 50 or 60 people there. And I was going to use this as a bit of an analogy as to my relationship with the toolkit. I like to think of myself as the first follower. That does unfortunately make Austin, my boss, the crazy guy dancing in the field on his own. So I have to be a little bit careful with that. It might be career limiting. But now I just want to talk through kind of how I got to grips with all of this. I saw it. I started to read through it. I didn't necessarily understand it all at this point, but I wanted to start using tools and techniques. So, you know, the thing that had resonated with me was VMOST. So I started to use it. And so this was for my ambition to run a marathon. Illustrative, I hasten to add, just illustrative. Using it for my personal development plan. So where do I want to be in 3 to 5 years? What are the key things that I need to focus on to get there? How am I going to know I'm achieving against those things? What shall I focus on to do it, and what shall I do? It's really kind of neat. It's just reconciles motivations with actions, and as such you can use it for all sorts of different things. But I started to use it, we were doing discoveries on these new ideas, and I started to use it to articulate the executive summary of those discoveries, because it's a great way of getting a lot of information on one page, so they understand how everything fits in the big picture. I was then asked to facilitate a workshop to come up with a corporate social responsibility strategy by 2 of the directors, and I thought this was a great opportunity to use this framework to start to capture things and build it from the ground up into a vision. And then finally, there was the opportunity to use it for a business case that was asking for £10 million. So this was we were asked to run a workshop with 40 people in it over 2 days and needed a framework. And so through these experiences, getting to grips with the structure of VMOST, practicing with it, if you will, we were primed to use that. And then that obviously exposed a lot more senior people in the organisation to the structure. But the real penny drop moment for me was the relationship between kind of 4 elements of the strategic alignment toolkit. And the relationship between, so if VMOST plots out where your organisation is trying to get to, the big changes to the status quo that are going to take the organisation from where it is today to this kind of halcyon vision state. How you're going to measure that the big changes to the status quo are happening, the things that you're going to focus on in order to hit those measurements, and then finally the things that you're going to do within those strategies. That's a great framework for filtering out 300 to 400 ideas into something more manageable, like 50, maybe 100 at a stretch. But then you've got the problem of, well, in what order do you do it? And that's where the weighted shortest job first mechanism is really, really helpful. Has anybody come across weighted shortest job first? It actually comes from SAFE, but it's about as scientific as you can get with a finger in the air. And it's a brilliant way of comparing different ideas by looking at different types of value. Now, if you remember what I said about Hermes in 2015, what it was really struggling to do was to make the case for making changes to that core system that ultimately fell over and caused chaos. When you've got an idea that's going to make 3 million quid, or you've got a big piece of operational infrastructure that's going to save 3 million quid. Well, this really helps, and it helps right at the beginning of the thought process before you know very much about the idea, because it gives you the ability to articulate different types of value. There's business value, which is pounds and pence, whether you're making it or whether you're saving it. There's time criticality. Certain things need to be done by a certain time, and if they're not, the value of them drops off dramatically. And then certain things you're doing about risk reduction. And this is really powerful because this unifies those different sorts of value and enables these different sorts of initiatives to compete. And then it looks at the size of those initiatives, because essentially what it's calculating is how are we going to get the most value? How can we get as far as possible as quickly as possible? So the thing with the high score isn't the thing with the highest value, and it's not the thing that's easiest to deliver. It's the best combination between those two things. It's the thing with the densest value. And that, again, was a really, really powerful message in the environment that I was in at Hermes. And then the next stage to that, which is, okay, if we've got a kind of optimized order in which we do these things, if we only had one team, how long would it take to do all of these? Based on these high-level estimate of the size, how long would it take to do these things? Is the value there in some of these later events to justify the expense of adding another team? And it gets the business thinking in terms of ROI. And because Hermes was a growing business, there was a tendency to just throw people at the problem. You know, if there's a long list of things to do, we'll get more teams. It's not quite as simple as that, because it could be a false economy if the value isn't there. And then finally, something more akin to what you're probably used to seeing in organisations, more of a Gantt chart view, that starts to factor in the dependencies and turn this idealised list into an actual kind of order of attack for those initiatives. But understanding that, which I did after attending a course for 2 days at the Berendo offices, really kind of unlocked the potential behind this tool. So before long, I found myself in a position to kind of use what I'd learned for a real problem. And that problem was the fact that the CEO had asked my boss for assurances that all of the new products that we committed to do as part of the portfolio would be there ready for February. Because in February was the MetaPack conference, and the MetaPack conference in the retail and logistics industry is a bit of a kind of rah-rah, where the CEOs of all of the relative of all of the companies start to talk about what exciting products that they've done, and we were behind on everything on the portfolio, so we had a huge prioritization problem. Well, I'd just learnt about weighted shortest job first, and kind of suggested, well, actually, this is precisely the problem that this tool is looking to solve. So I did what any good business analyst does, and I massively overcomplicated it. What I thought I'd do, because the different initiatives impacted different teams to different extents, I had a way of weighting and a way of indicating the size for each of those teams. Because there were different sorts of value, I had a way of weighting and capturing different sorts of value. Was it a new product that the CEO would be able to present? Did it enable us to exit the Hamburg data center and not be the last tenant in there and liable for a £10 million fee? Is it needed for our peak period? Does it have a big payback in and of its own right? Is it going to help our reputation with the business? Now, in the event, I tried to use this with a group of about 20 managers across IT, and what they said was, well, look, rather than doing all that, why don't we just calculate a size score, a business value score, a risk score, and a time criticality score? And I'm like, well, that's literally weighted shortest job first. So we kind of got there in the end. The big opportunity, though, for all of this came because I was on holiday. Now, every year, in around about October time, Hermes has an annual conference. It's generally quite a glitzy event. Lots of people from every area of the country coming to hear presentations from the directors. And it's great because it's the point in the year where you feel most connected to the company and what the company is trying to do. And I couldn't go because I was sunning myself in Mallorca at the time. And that meant I didn't see the CEO's presentation. And that in turn meant that when I got back, I had to ask HR for the video of it. And when I watched the video of it, I started to take notes and form it into a bit of a VMOST view. That also coincided with the CEO's new idea for next year. He had a born agile agenda. So he had this vision of 50 releases a day, and he tasked the head of development with making that real for him. And the head of development said, crikey, where do I start? And started doing a little bit of web research. Before long, came across the BAD Toolkit online, and then filled in the form for more information on the BAD Toolkit, which I think came to Glenn, one of the founders, who responded and said, well, you're from Hermes, aren't you? Why don't you talk to Tim? So he did. He came and he sought me out, and I got involved in that, because what I'd done is I'd translated the CEO's conference speech into the kind of simple 3-point strategy that what we needed to do to become a £1 billion revenue, £100 billion profit company was we need to develop great products for 2 reasons. 1, because it allows us to charge more per parcel. 2, because it attracts additional parcel volume. But if we're going to attract additional parcel volume, we're going to need to grow our network to be able to handle that parcel volume. So between those 2 things, that was what was going to drive the £1 billion revenue company. But at that point, network compliance was a little bit of a problem, so we were paying out a lot of money in claims and investing a lot of money in customer services. So the other thing that we needed to do is to increase our compliance so that all of this money that was coming through the till, we got to keep more of. And that was the £100 million profit element of it. So I kind of melded those 2 things together in order to describe the programs. So the vision that the CEO had talked about, lots of good stuff in there about being a premium service, about setting the agenda, thought leadership and all of that good stuff. But the bit of this that was really evocative, that really meant something to people, was this £1 billion turnover, £100 million profit company. Here's how the 3 circumstances work together to do that. So these were the kind of missions on the VMOST. So the question is, how do we know that we've got the best products to attract that initial volume? How would you measure that? What yardsticks would you use? Well, you should see increased revenue per parcel. You should also see decreased cost per contact, because a lot of our products in a parcel delivery company were about customer convenience. Ultimately, it was about communicating with the customer so the customer didn't have to get in touch with customer services. How do you know that you're growing your network? Well, you know based on projections how many parcels per day the network needs to be able to process through hubs, through depots, through transport and through couriers. But if you've got more hubs and more depots, then in theory you need more finance people, you need more HR people. So if we could absorb the operational growth in the network without having to increase the headcount in those functions, then that was essentially the objective there. And of course, network growth isn't just about parcels. All of those parcels were underpinned by IT systems, so we needed to eliminate IT constraints to growth. We knew we needed to increase our IT capacity and how much by, and we knew how much in our peak period. And then finally, we measure compliance, so we were expecting to see movement on those indicators there. And what that did is it set the context for the programs. So you had a products from business to consumer program that was looking to increase revenue per parcel. You also had an e-commerce product that was looking to do the same thing. So that became this kind of on the page, 1-page view of the portfolio, why we were doing everything that we were doing. And I presented this at the IT conference, and the CIO saw it, and he came up to me and he says, well, I want one of these for each program. Can you do it for each program? Opportunity I absolutely jumped at. So I worked with the with the program managers and the business owners and duly obliged that request. The added bonus was that it gave the opportunity not only to break down what each program looked like, but to prioritize each of the projects within it according to this weighted shortest job first principle. Really, really powerful in Hermes, because it got all of the business owners and stakeholders around the programs thinking in these terms. You know, previously they'd have wanted to do the biggest thing on the list, whereas IT would have wanted to do the smallest thing on the list to get it out of the door. What this did is it brought the business and IT much closer together with a pragmatic view of what order in which we should do things. What it also did is it provided a structure to be able to tie what was happening in the business and the portfolio to what was happening in IT. So we built the structure of VMOST for each of those programs into Jira Portfolio, which provided a place for the IT teams to map their stories back to. And what that did is it gave the CIO a single view of where everything was at any level of this that he wanted to talk about. And that was a very powerful asset for him in being able to manage the board. So, what impact did this have? So first of all, It was positive from the perspective of the management of demand. And so this was just an example of the Business Intelligence Steering Board on Thursday, the 9th of July. A new idea had come in. It was the most, important thing that we needed to do. But it was just the conversation. It was the head of MI saying, well, perhaps we could phase it, deliver the first phase of this in preference to the last phase of something else. Or the CIO saying, okay, so it looks like we can slot it in November. I've got the picture. I can tell the story. I can square that with the rest of the exco. And then the CFO saying, well, this is the best meeting we've had. This really works, doesn't it? It's non-emotional. We have a look. We do whatever has most business value. And when your CFO is saying that, it's the portent of change in your organisation. So, back in March 2020, you probably remember, there was a big change of plans. Everything was thrown into disarray. And this is something that really affected Hermes in a positive way. Suddenly, everybody's at home. They can't go to shops to buy things. They need stuff delivering to them. So suddenly, this ambition of becoming a £1 billion turnover, £100 million profit company was brought into sharp focus. And the business managed to double in size over the course of 5 months. And it was able to do that because of how the portfolio was structured, because of how the programs were structured around objectives. We knew where to put the investment. We were able to very, very quickly respond. Now, in previous years, it would have taken 5 months just to reprioritize the portfolio. So these are really, really powerful tools in an organization. So this was the capacity program, which had grown significantly. 69% of the investment in the portfolio was for this, for this capacity. It was a central home for all of the things that we needed to do. So, the impact on the BA team. So, coming from a place where I spend 3 hours in the workshop with one of your BAs, they come back 6 weeks later with a process map. Anytime anybody wanted a new idea, they wanted a VMOST, because they saw how powerful VMOST was as a way of contextualizing the idea, as a way of talking about the value of the idea, of the way of how to align it to what the business is trying to do. Any time a VMOST or a weighted shortest job first analysis needed to be changed, my team needed to be there to facilitate. So all this groundwork that I'd done sort of exploring the toolkit with the team suddenly came to fruition when this set of circumstances presented itself. And as a result of that, the team suddenly got exposure to much more senior managers than they were used to. And they got to drive the conversations by stealth, by facilitating these sessions. I'm apparently still referred to as the VMOST guy at Hermes, and I am still dining out on it, as you can tell. And probably the biggest thing is that the BA team suddenly got some new teammates, because as a result of this, inherited the product owners from IT and were formed into a new portfolio and product team. And then what happened at the end of 2020 is that Hermes was acquired by a private equity company that was obviously quite impressed with its ability to scale by 100% over the course of 5 months. But they were more concerned with predictability than speed. So what they wanted was for us all to have, bounded sets of artifacts so that we could manage expectations across all of these different stakeholder groups. But this was a fantastic opportunity to introduce another part of the toolkit, which was the discovery toolkit. So VMOST is kind of sold in Hermes. The business are used to seeing it. They like the format, and therefore anytime there's a new idea or a new project or a new program, this is a great way of reconciling their motivations with their actions. It's helpful to make that visual. So, not everything was from the toolkit, but, a concept diagram was another prerequisite for our discovery outputs. A business capability heat map, that is in the toolkit, but this one was tailored specifically for the value chain at Hermes. A quick way of showing, when you don't know very much about an idea, which parts of the organisation you think it's going to touch, and therefore which people you need to involve, and you get a sense of the scale of the delivery off the back of that. An impact map, which is a similar sort of structure to VMOST, but applied more to a specific idea, and this is more about the who. How can they influence the proposition, and what do we need to do in terms of features in order to cater for those? And this is powerful because it's a visual way of delineating scope. You can brainstorm by understanding who's going to be involved and what you'll need to do for them, but then you bring it back into what do we really need to deliver in order to get the value from this idea. And then a concept card summary. So if you've got 300 or 400 ideas a year coming in, it's helpful to have them on one page so that they can be put on a wall and compared side by side. And this is something that really helped the governance forums at Hermes make decisions around what to pursue. And we actually did 120 of these in 2021. The team had to double in size in order to cope with demand. We had to introduce a Kanban in order to understand where we were against each of these discoveries. And finally migrated that onto Confluence so that we could link it up better with what IT was doing via the Jira boards. So you'll be relieved to hear I'm coming to the end of my presentation. The things that I want you to kind of take away from it is that it was really by getting involved in the community, first of all, that I got this kind of end-to-end understanding of Agile and how it should work. And it was by introducing elements of it by stealth, really, and in the course of what we were doing as a BA team. That laid the groundwork and enabled us to capitalise on the opportunity. So I didn't have to go and sell it to my CIO. He came to me and asked for one of these. This made business analysis front and centre of every change, at the very heart of the Agile process. We needed to be across and involved in absolutely everything. And I think that probably the most powerful impact, beyond the use of any technique or any tool or any method, is the way in which it influenced how stakeholders at Hermes actually thought about change. And that's a sort of lasting legacy. And I guess I just want to leave you with this one thought. I mean, imagine if general elections were conducted on the basis of parties competing VMOSTs. This is where we're trying to get to. This is what we think we need to change to get there. Here's how we're going to measure our effectiveness. This is what we want to focus on, and this is what we want to do. So that's it. Does anybody have any questions at this point, or any feedback as to too many slides, talk for too long, that kind of thing? Food was really nice.